Members, the House is resumed. We are debating the second reading of the Sentencing Protection of Children from Criminal Offending Amendment Bill, and when we adjourned, Jacinda Ardern has 3 minutes and 50 seconds remaining if she wishes to take it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, I will. Before the break, I was discussing the work of Chloe Barker, a Auckland-based lawyer who's done a significant amount of research into children who are affected by parents or caregivers operating methamphetamine labs and subsequent ability to take action against those caregivers. And the point that she had made, and which I quoted to the House, was that currently in New Zealand law, general child abuse laws are used to prosecute those who have exposed children to methamphetamine, and that the test in those laws were relatively high. The point that I was wanting to make was that the principle of what Asanati Lole-Taylor in this bill was trying to uphold is a good one, but the mechanism was incorrect. The Sentencing Act requires someone, of course, to be charged and convicted before then you can apply an additional aggravating factor. When in fact what we need to do is address the fact that the act of itself exposing a child to methamphetamine manufacturing should be easier to prosecute as a standalone either form of child abuse or a part of the Crimes Act. It should have its own charge in and of itself, and that's the problem that actually hasn't been addressed with this bill. That we implored New Zealand First to have a think about how that could be done instead. At the moment, one of the issues is that the child abuse laws require you to demonstrate injury has occurred. Now, there's not much longitudinal research around the long-term effects of exposure, not intake, but exposure of methamphetamine. Now, of course, to do that long-term research, you, of course, would need the consent of caregivers. That in itself is going to be an issue if you've been a caregiver in the past who's exposed a child to methamphetamine, the transients of the families who may have children who have been exposed to methamphetamine, just basic issues around trying to track long-term those effects. A secondary measure though, if we are finding it difficult to prove injury, then we need to lower the threshold test in the law, but we should also be making sure that actually we do treat this as a child welfare issue. I want to pay tribute to the New Zealand Police, Detective Senior Sergeant John Brunton in particular, who's the manager of the National Clan Research Clan Lab Response Team. He stated that the exposure of children to drugs and chemicals is often complemented with exposure to criminal lifestyle, neglect, psychological, emotional, physical or sexual abuse. The study, he said, speaking of Chloe's work, corroborates my belief that police and other response agencies could be more effective in bringing about better outcomes for these children if supported by legislation and information sharing policies. Now, what he was referring to was the fact that since 2007, the police have had standard operating procedures that tell them how they best deal with children found in manufacturing labs. SIFs, right up until 2013, had no such operating procedures. They had no agreement with police on how to deal with these children. In some cases, we had examples of children being removed and then rehoused with caregivers who were operating methamphetamine labs sometimes 2 days after they were removed. That is utterly unacceptable. Now, my understanding is that SIFs have finally come to the party with police, but it was simply not good enough that the exposure of these children to these environments was not seen as sufficient to warrant emergency procedures to ensure that those children were safe and kept away from harm in the longer term. We must do better in this area, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate the work of Chloe Barker again and the ongoing work of police officers like Detective Senior Sergeant John Brunton. We should be listening to their research and constructing legislation around that so we make a real difference on behalf of children.